We were graced with 4 different Star Wars shows in 2022, and we've ranked them from worst to best. On that note, the award for the worst goes to The Book of Boba Fett. Okay, let's be honest. Many of us, including a lot of critics, loved the first episode, but then it's weird how the rest of the show just went downhill from there. In the end, The Book of Boba Fett just didn't live up to its own high standards and was a disappointment overall. Whip Media called it 2022's most anticipated new show. Yeah, right. After Boba Fett's unexpected return in The Mandalorian Season 2, it's clear that there was a big demand for a show about him. Still, despite all the excitement, the show turned into a confusing mix of flashbacks, cameos, and confusing storylines. So it makes sense why this led to some of the worst reviews for a Disney Plus Star Wars TV show so far. Guess this one just wasn't it for a lot of us. But there's also a bigger problem with the show, and that's the fact that the main character just disappeared for a bit. The main complaint about the Book of Boba Fett was that the main character wasn't in episodes 5 and 6. Okay, talk about being random. This was more important than questionable scenes with mopeds that reminded people of the Power Rangers. Din Djarin and Grogu suddenly became the main characters of the story, making Fett a minor character in his own story. This decision literally took away so much of the epic ending of the second season of The Mandalorian, but it also made Boba Fett's story on Tatooine longer than it needed to be. This, along with cameos, didn't work like the highly anticipated live-action debut of Cad Bane, and that's enough to explain why the Book of Boba Fett's controversial approach didn't pay off. Although, when it comes to not doing enough to make a Star Wars show successful, there's another show in the same category, and that's Obi-Wan Kenobi. Out of all the Star Wars shows here, this one takes the lead in getting the most mixed reviews, and there's a good reason for that. Keep in mind that this show already had a troubled production process and plans for a movie release that were scrapped. So the fact that the final product was even coherent or interesting is, in some ways, a big win. But there's also an undeniable feeling that we can't let go of. Believe it or not, it seems like the show missed a chance to go deeper into the time period that is rarely shown in Star Wars media. That's not all though. The show is also lacking the oomph factor that we expect from Star Wars content. Many people thought that Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan and Hayden Christensen as Anakin Skywalker were one of the best parts of the prequel trilogy, so it was easy to understand why people were excited to see them back. Even though it was great to see them again, Obi-Wan Kenobi had a slow pace. And then, on top of this, there were also bad action scenes. The cherry on top of this basic dessert was a general feeling of boredom that was hard to ignore. Reva did have a nice impact though. She helped shake up the formula by coming into the story, but this was tempered by parts like Haja Estri and Tala Durith, who both felt underused and underdeveloped. Thankfully though, the show was able to redeem itself because the final of Obi-Wan Kenobi was pretty good. Yep, Obi-Wan Kenobi may have been saved by a touching and emotionally moving ending in which the Jedi Knight finally confronted his dead friend. The choreography of Obi-Wan and Anakin's fight for sure could have been better, but the way it ended was pretty heartbreaking. McGregor's performance gave weight and authenticity to what could have been a soulless and pointless spin-off without him. Even though it didn't hit every mark, the long-awaited rematch between Vader and Kenobi did a lot. It also solidified Obi-Wan Kenobi's place in the Star Wars franchise. While this show at least started out with having a pretty big fanfare, there's another show that wasn't so lucky, and that's Tales of the Jedi. Unlike some of its more famous relatives, Tales of the Jedi didn't get as much attention when it came to Disney Plus.
We'll be arriving shortly, Master.
Set us down well clear of the village. Tensions are high enough.
Yes, Master.
It was a fairly low-stakes look at the careers of 2 of the Jedi Order's most popular disciples. But even then, the show was a fascinating and exciting addition to the Star Wars universe. Tales of the Jedi focused on Count Dooku and Ahsoka Tano. It also told parts of their backstories that had never been seen before. This helped us learn more about their characters and understood some of the things they did in shows like The Clone Wars. In doing so, the 6-part series also shed light on on little-known parts of Star Wars lore. And hey, who doesn't want more Star Wars content, am I right? So this definitely ended up making the whole franchise richer as a result. This isn't the only thing that was good about the show, though. Another thing was the fact that this show had a very nice way of storytelling. Well, maybe nice doesn't do it justice enough. The show had a subtle way of telling stories, which was pretty good. Its episodes didn't really have the high-stakes action of the Book of Boba Fett, but the calm way it was made helped show new sides of the characters. For example, they showed Dooku's actions in the Phantom Menace, and by doing that, Tales of the Jedi was able to better explain how a once good Jedi Knight might turn to the dark side.
Sifo Dyas, Camino, the clones. I have betrayed everyone and everything.
In many ways, the show's greatest strength wasn't introducing retcons that changed the story or making cameos that didn't make sense. Instead, it was quietly adding color to a world that was already full of life. This approach won't work for every Star Wars show, and we've seen some failed attempts too, but it did work well for Tales of the Jedi, so hey, I'm happy for the show. In the end, the success of this show was more or less expected, but there's another show we never thought would do that well, and that's Andor. Now, when the project first took some shape, skeptics wondered what the series could possibly add.
Cassian, where's Biggs? I'm sorry about your mother.
Understandable, since the audience already knew what happened to the main character on Scarif. The end was always clear when it came to Andor. But even then, it showed that sometimes the journey is just as important as the final destination. Andor was a slow-burning psychological drama, and it was very different from any other Star Wars TV show. It was also mostly free of the cameos and callbacks that have come to define the long-running franchise. The show could have gone for easy wins and fan service, but instead, it looked at how the Empire oppressed people in a sinister way, and it got to the heart of what really makes people rebel. Cassian Andor was a key part of the plot. The real story was how many small acts of defiance built up to a big conflagration of open revolt. Andor's approach also goes against what Star Wars has always been about. The show told a much less dramatic but ultimately true story about how rebellions are really fought. On the rebel side, everyone was afraid, paranoid, and suspicious. This is because they knew that even the smallest mistake could lead to torture and death. Instead of a simple blaster fight, they could easily win. On the other hand, the Empire's machines are shown at their most ruthless and unyielding, finally making the original trilogy's main villain truly scary. That's your recap of every Star Wars TV show of 2022, ranked from worst to best. Hope you had fun. See you in the next one.
Kill me.